Hi, boys and girls. It is April 9th, 2020, and it is Thursday already, our last day of the week. Woohoo! Tomorrow you have the day off. And so I just wanted to touch base with you before we start our read aloud about your lesson from yesterday. Yesterday we talked about the elements of a fairy tale. And some of the elements we talked about are that there's a good character, an evil character, there are kings and queens and other nobility and royal people. There is magic, and there are even sometimes animals that take on human characteristics, a lot of 3s and 7s, and usually fairy tales start with special language like once upon a time, and they usually end with special language like and they lived happily ever after. The main character, I should say, always goes through some trouble that it befalls them. And the other thing that I wanted to share real quickly about fairy tales is that fairy tales are fiction, and so they follow a lot of the elements that a fiction story follows. We know that they would have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We know they have a problem and a resolution. We know that they have a main character, and we know they have secondary characters as well. And of course, we know that there is a setting. One more thing that I wanted to share about fairy tales is there's also what's called a backstory, where we're given a little bit of information about that main character as to how they got into the situation that they're in. For example, in Snow White, the backstory is that Snow White was born to a king and queen, and the child was very beautiful, and sadly the queen died, and then the king ended up remarrying, and his second wife was the evil queen. And as Snow White grew, she grew in beauty until the story begins, and now Snow White is this beautiful young lady. So that would be considered backstory. Anyway, I hope that you are enjoying using the resources that Mrs. Hop and I added to your Google Classroom so that you can get a hold of some really cool fairy tales. You are welcome to read your own fairy tales from your own bookshelves at home. Please continue to use the fairy tale element chart if you would like to add more fairy tales onto your list. You can read as many as you would like. I'd like you to read one today if you can, but if you'd like to read more, certainly read as many as you would like. Also, if you are having any trouble with any of the links in that document that we sent to you, if you do have trouble and it is blocked, that means that the only way that you can access those sites is if you use your own home computer or a different device. Our school district has blocked YouTube for your Chromebooks, and I do apologize, but there are several other links, and of course you can use Raz Kids, Sora, and all of the Discovery streaming links that we gave you as well. So don't get discouraged. There are a lot of fairy tales out there that you can read. So that being said, today we are going to read to the end of Judy Blume's Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. So sit back, relax, and listen up. Chapter 9. Now, this is called Just Another Rainy Day. So Thursday was a really rainy day, wasn't it? Wednesday was a really rainy day. Hopefully today is going to be a nicer day. So chapter 9, Just Another Rainy Day. The next day it rained. My father asked me how I'd like to go to the movies. Just me, I asked. No, all 3 of us, he said. Fudge is very young to go, I said. Don't you think so? Maybe, but I can't think of anything else to do with him, and that will take up a few hours. You could give him some socks, I suggested. You know how he loves to play with your socks. Socks won't last the whole afternoon, my father said. That's why I thought of the movies. What'll we see, Dad? My father checked his New York magazine. A Bear's Life is playing in the neighborhood. How does that sound? What's it about? I asked. A Bear's Life, I guess, my father said. It's rated G. I was thinking of a good Western with lots of action, or else a picture rated R where you can't get in at all if you're under 17, unless you're with a parent. But my father had made up his mind. A Bear's Life it was. I suggested that my father get Fudge cleaned up because by then he was looking kind of messy. I don't think my father even put him into his pajamas last night. He's been wearing the same polo shirt ever since my mother left yesterday morning. By 1 o'clock, we were ready to go. All three of us wore our raincoats and rubbers, and my father took his big black umbrella. One thing about New York, it's hard to get a cab when it's raining, but the movie theater wasn't very far away. My father said the walk would do us all good. There were a lot of puddles. It was really pouring. I like to walk in the rain, especially if it isn't too cold out. It feels nice when it wets your face. I jumped over the puddles. My father avoided them, but not Fudge. He jumped right into everyone and splashed around like a duck. By the time we got to the movie theater, the bottom of his pants were soaked. My father took him into the men's room. He stuffed a bunch of paper towels up each pant leg so Fudge wouldn't have to sit around wet. At first, Fudge complained, but when my father bought him a big box of popcorn, he forgot his stuffed pants. Right after we got settled in our seats, a big boy sat down in front of Fudge, so he had to change seats with my father. Now he was on the aisle. I was in the middle, and my father was on my other side. When the lights dimmed, Fudge said, "Ooh, dark." I told him, "Be quiet. You can't talk in the movies." "Okay, Peter," he said. That's when he started throwing his popcorn. At first I didn't notice, but I wondered why the people in front of us were turning around every second. Then I heard Fudge whisper, "Pow, pow, pow," and I saw him throw a handful of popcorn. I poked my father. "He's throwing his popcorn," I whispered. My father reached across me and tapped Fudge on the leg. "If you throw one more piece, I'm going to take it away from you." "No throw," Fudge said very loud. "Shh," the people in front of us said. "Shh," Fudge said back to them. "You see," I told my father, "he's too young for the movies. He doesn't understand." But from the moment the first bear came on the screen, Fudge sat still and watched. And after a while, I forgot all about him and concentrated on the movie. It was much better than I thought it would be. It showed all these bear cubs and how they live. I'm not sure when I realized that Fudge was gone. I guess it was when I turned to ask him if he had any popcorn left. I had already finished mine and was still hungry. I was really surprised to see he wasn't there. I mean, 1 minute he was sitting right next to me, and the next minute he was gone. "Hey, Dad," I whispered to my father. "He's gone." "What?" my father asked. "Fudge isn't in his seat." My father looked over. "Where did he go?" "I don't know. I just noticed he was gone." "Let me out, Peter. I'll find him." "Should I come too?" I asked. "No, you can sit here and watch the rest of the picture. He's probably wandering around by the candy counter." I stood up to let my father out. I wondered what my mother would think if she knew Fudge was lost in the movies. A few minutes later, the picture stopped, right in the middle of a scene. The soundtrack trailed off like a broken record. All the lights came on. The audience let out a groan. Some kids called, "Boo! Boo!" Then my father and 2 ushers and a man in a suit came over to me. "He was sitting right here," my father told them, pointing at the empty seat on the aisle. "Well," the man in the suit said, "we've checked the rest of the rooms and the office and the restrooms. He's not behind the candy counter. We'll have to search the theater." He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? We'll continue with our film in one moment, but first we have to find a 3-year-old boy answering to the name of Fudge." Some people laughed when the man said the name. I guess Fudge doesn't sound funny if... It does sound funny if you're not used to it. I thought maybe he's been kidnapped. Would my mother be mad? That crazy kid. You can't even take him to the movies. Then I thought, who'd want to kidnap him anyway? "What should I do, Dad?" I said. "Why don't you walk up and down the aisle and call him, Peter?" "Okay," I said. "Here, Fudge," I called, starting down my aisle and sounding like I was calling a dog. "Come on out, Fudge." When I got down to the first row and called, "Here, Fudge," he popped out at me. He scared me so bad I yelled, "Oh!" "Hi, Peter," he said. "Hey, I found him," I called. I found him. Here he is." Then I turned to my brother. "You dope. What are you doing way down here? And why are you sitting on the floor?" "I wanted to touch the bears," Fudge said. "But bears are all gone." He spread out his arms and said, "All gone," again. My father and the ushers and the man in the suit ran up to us. "Fudge," my father said, scooping him up. "Are you all right?" "He wanted to pet the bears," I said. "Can you beat that?" "Well, I guess we can continue the picture now," the man in the suit said. He cupped his hands around his mouth again. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our young man has been found safe and sound. Now we return to the conclusion of A Bear's Life." My dad carried Fudge back to our seats. He held him in his lap for the rest of the show. I guess he wasn't going to take any more chances. Later, when we got home, my father explained to Fudge that movies are like TV. It's just a picture. There's nothing to touch. Fudge listened, but I don't know whether he believed my father. I had the feeling he still thought those bears were in the theater somewhere. I made up my mind that I would never take my brother to a movie again. Never. At least not until he was 9 or 10. My father said he was going to cook us something special for dinner to celebrate finding Fudge in the movies. I thought that this was really strange because, as far as I know, my father can't cook anything. He doesn't even know where my mother keeps the peanut butter, the dishes, or the pots and pans. Lucky for him, I was there to show him. "What are you going to cook, Dad?" "A super-duper omelet," he said. "Omelet? I'm not sure me and Fudge like omelets." "You'll like this one," my father said, humming as he gathered his ingredients together. "Get me a big frying pan, Peter." "Okay," I said. I gave it to him. He melted some butter in it. "What's going in the super-duper omelet?" I asked while Fudge sat on the floor banging 2 pot covers together. "Well, eggs, of course," my father said. "Omelets are made of eggs." "And what else?" I asked. "Oh, I think I'll make a mushroom omelet." "Eggs and mushrooms?" I asked. "Yes, you'll love it." "I'm not so sure." "You'll see, Peter," my father said. I set up the table while my father cooked. I even put Fudge in his booster chair. When the omelet was done, my father brought it to us. He was still humming. "That's some big omelet," I said when I saw it. It filled up the whole frying pan. "How many eggs did you use?" "Oh, about a dozen," my father said. "Mom only cooks one at a time," I told him. "When you taste this, you'll know why I used them all up." "You mean it's that good?" I asked. "Go on," my father said as he served it to me. "Taste it." I took a bite. It was awful. The worst thing I ever had in my life. But my father was still standing there grinning at me. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. "Well," he said, "it's nice," I told him, swallowing a chunk whole. I washed it down with a glass of milk. "You see, your mother ought to experiment more. Then you'd learn to eat a lot of different things." "I don't think Mom ever made me a mushroom omelet," I said. My father put some on Fudge's plate. Then he served himself. Fudge shoved a lot into his mouth at once. I waited, figuring he'd choke on it. Instead, he said, Good." My father beamed. Fudge wasn't smart enough to fool my father, so he must have really liked it. But a kid that can eat flowers and swallow teeth wouldn't know much about omelets anyway. Then my father sat down and tasted his super-duper concoction. He not only choked on it, he spit it out. "Oh, no," he said. "This is awful. Something went wrong. Maybe the eggs are rotten." "Mom just bought those eggs on Thursday," I said. Maybe it's the mushrooms, my father said. Maybe it's how you cooked it, I suggested. My father jumped up from the table and threw the mushroom omelet into the garbage. Fudge started to cry. Want more, more. No, my father told him. It wasn't any good. Fudge screamed, eat it or wear it, eat it or wear it. He flung his spoon across the room. It hit my mother's favorite plant. The dirt spilled all over the kitchen floor. Now you stop that, my father yelled at Fudge. I'm going to make us a nice peanut butter sandwich. Then you're going to have a bath. Your mommy's coming home. Then you're going to have a bath. Your mommy's coming home tomorrow, and we're going to show her how well Daddy managed all by himself. Peter, where does your mother hide the peanut butter? After supper, my father bathed Fudge. The only thing he decided not to do were the dishes. He stacked them in the sink and left them for my mother. On Sunday afternoon, we drove out to the airport to meet my mom. On the way there, my father said, wouldn't it be fun if we kept all the things we did over the weekend a secret, just between the three of us? Kind of a man's secret. I agreed not to say a word, and my mother was so glad to see us that she didn't even mention the dirty dishes in the sink. 6 weeks later, we were watching TV one night when the new Toddle Bike commercial came on. That's me, Fudge said. My mother looked up from the book she was reading. He does look like you, Fudge, but that's not really you. Oh, yes, Fudge said. That's me, see? My mother squinted and looked harder. You know, Warren, she said to my father, he really does look like Fudge. Then she laughed. Imagine a little boy that looks just like Fudge. It's Fudge, all right, I said. It's Fudge, all right, my brother repeated. We didn't tell you, dear, my father said. We thought you'd like to be surprised. But that is Fudge. What? My mother said, like she couldn't believe it. You see, Mom, I began. Remember that weekend when you went to visit Aunt Linda? Then I stopped and thought about all the things my mother didn't know, like the puddles Fudge splashed in and the paper towels up his pants, and how he wanted to touch the bears, and the mushroom omelet, and Mr. Vincent and his big cigar, and Janet and her goldfish crackers. And I looked at my father and I started to laugh. So did he. Chapter 10, Dribble. I will never forget Friday, May 10th. It's the most important day of my life. It didn't start out that way. It started out ordinary. I went to school, I ate my lunch, I had gym, and then I walked home from school with Jimmy Fargo. We planned to meet at our special rock in the park as soon as we changed our clothes. In the elevator, I told Henry I was glad summer was coming. Henry said he was too. When I got out at my floor, I walked down the hall and opened up the door to my apartment. I took off my jacket and hung it up in the closet. I put my books on the hall table next to my mother's purse. I went straight to my room to change my clothes and check on Dribble. The first thing I noticed was my chain latch. It was unhooked. My bedroom door was open, and there was a chair smack in the middle of my doorway. I nearly tumbled over it. I ran to my dresser to check Dribble. He wasn't there. His bowl with the rocks and water was there, but Dribble was gone. I got really scared. I thought maybe he died while I was at school and I didn't know about it. So I rushed into the kitchen and hollered, Mom, where's Dribble? My mother was baking something. My brother sat on the kitchen floor, banging pots and pans together. Be quiet, I yelled at Fudge. I can't hear anything with all that noise. What did you say, Peter? My mother asked me. I said, I can't find Dribble. Where is he? You mean he's not in his bowl? My mother asked. I shook my head. Oh, dear, my mom said. I hope he's not crawling around somewhere. You know I don't like the way he smells. I'm going to have a look in the bedrooms. You check in here, Peter. My mother hurried off. I looked at my brother. He was smiling. Fudge, do you know where Dribble is? I asked him calmly. He kept smiling. Did you take him? Did you, Fudge? I asked, not so calmly. Fudge giggled and covered his mouth with his hands. I yelled, Where is he? What did you do with my turtle? No answer from Fudge. He banged his pots and pans together again. I yanked the pots and pans out of his hand. I tried to speak softly. No, tell me where Dribble is. Just tell me where my turtle is. I won't be mad at you if you tell me. Come on, Fudge, please. Fudge looked up at me. In my tummy, he said. What do you mean in your tummy? I asked, narrowing my eyes. Dribble in tummy, he repeated. What tummy? I shouted at my brother. This one, Fudge said, rubbing his stomach. Dribble in this tummy right here. I decided to go along with his game. Okay, so how did you get him in there, Fudge? I asked. Fudge stood up. He jumped up and down and sang, I ate him, I ate him, I ate him, I ate him. Then he ran out of the room. My mother came back into the kitchen. Well, I just can't find him anywhere, she said. I looked in all the dresser drawers and the bathroom cabinets and the shower and the tub. And, Mom, I said, shaking my head, how could you? How could I do what, Peter? Mom asked. How could you let him do it? Let who do what, Peter? Let Fudge eat Dribble, I screamed. My mother started to mix whatever she was baking. Don't be silly, Peter, she said. Dribble is a turtle. He ate Dribble, I insisted. Peter Warren Hatcher, stop saying that, my mom hollered. Well, ask him. Go ahead and ask him, I told her. Fudge was standing in the kitchen doorway with a big grin on his face. My mother picked him up and patted his head. Fudgy, she said to him, tell Mommy where Brother's turtle is. In tummy, Fudge said. What tummy? Mom asked. Mine, Fudge laughed. My mother put Fudge down on the kitchen counter where he couldn't get away from her. Oh, you're fooling Mommy. No fool, Fudge said. My mother turned very pale. You really ate your brother's turtle? Big smile from Fudge. You mean that you put him in your mouth and chewed him up like this? Mom made believe that she was chewing. No, Fudge said. A smile of relief crossed my mother's face. Of course you didn't. It's just a joke. She put Fudge down on the floor and gave me a look. Fudge babbled. No chew, just gulp, gulp, all gone. Turtle, down Fudge's tummy. Me and my mother stared at Fudge. You didn't, Mom said. Did so, Fudge said. No, Mom shouted. Yes, Fudge shouted back. Yes? Mom asked weakly, holding on to a chair with both hands. Yes, Fudge beamed. My mother moaned and picked up my brother. Oh no, my angel, my precious little angel boy. Oh no. My mother didn't stop to think about my turtle. She didn't even give Dribble a thought. She didn't even stop to wonder how my turtle liked being swallowed by my brother. She ran to the phone with Fudge tucked under one arm. I followed Mom as she dialed the operator and cried, oh, help, this is an emergency. My baby ate a turtle. Stop that laughing. My mother told the operator, send an ambulance right away to 25 West 68th Street. Mom hung up. She didn't look too well. Tears were running down her face. She put Fudge down on the floor. I couldn't understand why she was so upset. Fudge seemed just fine. Help me, Peter, Mom begged. Get me blankets. I ran into my brother's room and I grabbed 2 blankets from Fudge's bed. He was following me around with that silly grin on his face. I felt like giving him a pinch. How could he stand there looking so happy when he had my turtle inside him? I delivered the blankets to my mother. She wrapped Fudge up in them and ran to the front door. I followed and grabbed her purse from the hall table. I figured she'd be glad if I thought of that. Out in the hall, I pressed the elevator buzzer. We had to wait a few minutes. Mom paced up and down in front of the elevator. Fudge was cradled in her arms. He sucked his fingers and made that slurping noise I like. But all I could think of was Dribble. Finally, the elevator got to our floor. There was these 3 people inside it besides Henry. This is an emergency, my mom wailed. The ambulance is waiting downstairs. Please hurry. Yes, Mrs. Hatcher, of course, Henry said. I'll run her down as fast as I can. No other stops. Someone poked me in the back. I turned around. It was Mrs. Rudder. What's the matter? She whispered. It's my brother, I whispered back. He ate my turtle. Mrs. Rudder whispered that to the man next to her, and he whispered it to the lady next to him, who whispered it to Henry. I faced front and pretended I didn't hear anything. My mother turned around with Fudge in her arms and said, That's not funny. Not funny at all. But Fudge said, Funny, 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 Fudgy. Everybody laughed, everybody except my mother. The elevator door opened. 2 men dressed in white were waiting with a stretcher. This is the baby? One of them asked. Yes, it is, my mom sobbed. Don't worry, lady. We'll get to the hospital in no time. Come, Peter, my mother said, tugging at my sleeve. We're going to ride in the ambulance with Fudge. My mother and I climbed into the back of the blue ambulance. I was never in one before. It was neat. Fudge kneeled on a cot and peered out through the window. He waved at the crowd of people who had gathered on the sidewalk. One of the attendants sat in the back with us. The other one was driving. What seems to be the trouble, lady? The attendant asked. This kid looks pretty healthy to me. He swallowed a turtle, my mother whispered. He did what? The attendant asked. He ate my turtle, that's what I told him. My mother covered her face with her hanky and started to cry again. Hey, Joe, the attendant called to the driver. Make it snappy. This one swallowed a turtle. That's not funny, my mom insisted. I didn't think so either, considering it was my turtle. We arrived at the back door of the hospital. Fudge was whisked away by 2 nurses. My mother ran after him. You wait here, young man, another nurse called to me, pointing to a bench. I sat down on the hard wooden bench. I didn't have anything to do. There weren't any books or magazines spread out, like when I go to Dr. Cohn's office. So I watched the clock and read all the signs on the walls. I found out I was in the emergency section of the hospital. After a while, the nurse came back. She gave me some paper and crayons. Here you are. Be a good boy and draw some pictures. Your mother will be out soon. I wondered if she knew about dribble, and that's why she was trying to be nice to me. I didn't feel like drawing any pictures. I wondered what they were doing to Fudge in there. Maybe he wasn't such a bad little guy after all. I remember that Jimmy Fargo had a little cousin once who swallowed the most valuable rock from Jimmy's collection. And my mother told me that when I was a little kid, I swallowed a quarter. Still, a quarter's not like a turtle. I watched the clock on the wall for an hour and 10 minutes, and then a door opened up and my mother stepped out with Dr. Cohn. I was surprised to see him. I didn't know he worked at the hospital. Hello, Peter, he said. Hello, Dr. Cohn. Did you get my turtle? Not yet, Peter, he said. I do have something to show you, though. Here are some x-rays of your brother. I studied the x-rays as Dr. Cohn pointed things out to me. You see, he said, there's your turtle, right there. I looked hard. Will Dribble be in there forever? I asked. No, definitely not. We'll get him out. We gave Fudge some medicine already. That should do the trick nicely. What kind of medicine? I asked. What trick? Castor oil, Peter, my mom said. Fudge took castor oil and milk of magnesia and prune juice too, lots of it. All those things will help get Dribble out of Fudge's tummy. We just have to wait, Dr. Cohn said, probably until tomorrow or the next day. Fudge will have to spend the night here, but I don't think he's going to be swallowing anything that he's not supposed to be swallowing from now on. How about Dribble? I asked. Will Dribble be all right? My mother and Dr. Cohn looked at each other. I knew the answer before he shook his head and said, I think you may have to get a new turtle, Peter. I don't want a new turtle, I said. Tears came to my eyes. I was embarrassed and wiped them away with the back of my hand. Then my nose started to run and I started to sniffle. I want Dribble, I said. That's the only turtle I want. My mother took me home in a taxi. She told me my father was on his way to the hospital to be with Fudge. When we got home, she made me lamb chops for dinner. I wasn't very hungry. My father came home late that night. I was still up. My father looked gloomy. He whispered to my mother, Not yet. Nothing yet. The next day was Saturday. No school. I spent the whole day in the hospital waiting room. There were plenty of people around. The magazines and books were there too. It wasn't like the hard bench in the emergency hallway. It was more like a living room. I told everybody that my brother ate my turtle. They looked at me kind of funny, but nobody ever said they were sorry to hear about my turtle. Not once. My mother joined me for supper in the hospital coffee shop. I ordered a hamburger, but I left most of it because right in the middle of supper, my mother told me that if the medicine didn't work soon, Fudge would have to have an operation to get dribble out of him. My mother didn't eat anything. That night, my grandmother came to stay with me. My mother and father stayed at the hospital with Fudge. Things were pretty dreary at home. Every hour the phone rang. It was my mother calling from the hospital with a report. Not yet. I see, Grandma repeated. Nothing happening yet. I was miserable. I was lonely. Grandma didn't notice. I even missed Fudge banging on his pots and pans. Together in the middle of the night, the phone rang again. It woke me up, and I crept out into the hallway to hear what was going on. Grandma shouted, "Whoopee! It's out. Good news at last." She hung up and turned to me. The medicine has finally worked, Peter. All that castor oil and milk of magnesia and prune juice finally worked. The turtle is out. Alive or dead? I asked. Peter Warren Hatcher, what a question, Grandma shouted. So my brother no longer had a turtle inside of him, and I no longer had a turtle. I didn't like Fudge as much as I thought I did before the phone call. The next morning, Fudge came home from the hospital. My father carried him into the apartment. My mother's arms were loaded with presents, all for Fudge. My mother put the presents down and kissed him. She said, Fudgy can have anything he wants, anything at all. Mommy's so happy her baby's all better. It was disgusting. Presents and kisses and attention for Fudge? I couldn't even look at him. He was having fun. He probably wasn't even sorry that he ate my turtle. That night, my father came home with the biggest box of all. It wasn't wrapped up or anything, but I knew it was another present. I turned away from my father. Peter, he said, this box is a surprise for you. Well, I don't want another turtle, I said. Don't think you can make me feel better with another turtle, because you can't. Who said anything about a turtle, son? Dad asked. You see, Peter, your mother and I think you've been a good sport about the whole situation. After all, Dribble was your pet. I looked up. Could I be hearing right? Did they really remember about me and Dribble? I put my hand inside the box. I felt something warm and soft and furry. I knew it was a dog, but I pretended to be surprised when he jumped up on my lap and licked me. Fudge cried, oh, doggy. See, doggy. He ran right over and grabbed my dog's tail. Fudge, my father said, taking him away. This is your brother's dog. Maybe someday you'll have a dog of your own, but this one belongs to Peter. Do you understand? Fudge nodded. Peter's dog. That's right, my father said. Peter's dog. Then he turned to me. And just to be sure, son, he said, we got a dog that's going to grow quite big, much too big for your brother to swallow. We all laughed. My dog was neat. I named him Turtle to remind me. The end. Thanks, boys and girls, for listening to Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. Remember, this is a part of a series, and if you enjoyed it, you might want to look into reading another one of Judy Blume's books. Have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday.